I had zero actual instrument time when I got my instrument rating. A week later, I decided I was going to make a trip, and I was going to make that trip come hell or high water because by God, I had my instrument rating. Nothing's going to stop me now because I've got my
What
instrument.
could go wrong?
What could go wrong, right?
Pat Brown, flying in less than stellar weather can actually be very safe and really enjoyable, provided you know how to do it. And I think it's good for us to talk about that because both of us are instrument pilots, both of us are instrument instructors. We have both spent some time in the clouds, but I think it's worth saying that first time was a little jarring. And before we get deep into it, please, viewer, click like on this video, subscribe to the channel, because the level of genius that's about to fall on you for free from this episode is so profound, you're going to be glad you did.
So, Jamie, before you go any further, let me what you just said really brought up just a very, and this will be very, very quick. But I got my instrument rating in 91 days, and in Houston, in a period of time where when the weather was gorgeous, that entire time I had zero actual instrument time when I got my instrument rating. A week later, I decided I was going to make a trip, and I was going to make that trip come hell or high water because by God, I had my instrument rating. Nothing's going to stop me now because I've got my
What
instrument.
could go wrong?
What could go wrong, right? So I take off into broken conditions here in Houston, flying west, totally unprepared for hitting a trough of low pressure that put me in solid IMC for the very first time ever by myself. I won't bore you with all of the details, but I will suffice it to say that the events that happened after that moment scared me so bad that I didn't fly instruments for 5 years. Five
Wow.
years. I had my double I before I actually got some actual instrument time. Scared me that bad. One day when we have some time, I'll recount the story, but that's serious. That's
Well,
serious.
I have a similar thing. I got most of my flight training was in Central Florida, where the weather is either, oh my God, this is fantastic, let's go flying, or holy crap, that's a hurricane, let's go home, get someplace else.
Yeah.
But we've got a couple scenarios to talk about here, and just so the viewer has some concept, I have some video here taken by Pat Brown, um, who punched into some clouds in a 182. And it really does show how within a minute, you could become totally disoriented if you're not trained for that. It's hard for people to understand, but upside down diving and right side up climbing feel exactly the same. So you can really get yourself in a world of hurt. 1 minute is a long, long time when you're not trained for that. And,
Yeah.
I was just talking to a mutual friend the other day, Mike Ginter, who is the head of the Air Safety Institute at AOPA.
Right.
And he made a really interesting point that I had never thought of it in these terms. VFR into IMC, instant meteorological conditions, doesn't cause an accident, but it does cause either controlled flight into terrain or loss of control. And both of those are prevalent accidents with a high fatality rate.
Yes.
So I think it's kind of worth talking about how this can really be ugly. And you just had an experience coming home from a trip with your wife, and all of a sudden it's IFR.
Yeah, we took off from Lockhart. The Lockhart's in Central Texas and has the home of the best barbecue in the world. Um,
I won't fight you on that because I've been out to lunch with you and I believe it's correct.
Anyway, we were coming back from Lockhart, and the forecast was for 4 or 5,000 foot overcast ceilings, pretty much through our arrival time back at home. But we got about 30 miles into it, and the ceilings were more like 2,000 feet. And a few more miles beyond that, they were down to 1,800 feet. And it became obvious that there's a trend developing here. So I called up Austin Approach and got a pop-up clearance. I don't like to do that unless it's really necessary. These folks are busy. When you just kind of pop onto the frequency and say, oops, I can't stay VFR, I needed a clearance, it does kind of mess up their flow. But nonetheless, if it's necessary, you do it. And that's exactly what happened. So I called them up, told them where we were, and they asked the normal question: is the airplane equipped properly, and is the pilot qualified? The answer to both of those is yes. We were in the 182. And he gave me a squawk code and said, "Can you maintain VFR for a minute or two?" And I said, "Yes, I can." And he came back a few minutes later and said, "Radar service, radar contact, climb and maintain 5,000 feet." And that was it. The rest of the flight home was IMC. By the time we got home, we had flown through this patch of bad stuff, and within about 5 miles of the airport, it was visual conditions again, and we canceled and flew the visual approach. But if I had been a non-instrument rated pilot, I would have been faced with two choices, three, I guess. One would be turn back. Number two would be to land, and I think we were going past Lagrange, I think, and the third is to scud run the rest of the way. Which the third choice is not the right choice.
Yeah, I was going to say, you and I have gone out on a limb over scud running quite a bit, saying like there is no circumstance where that's a good idea.
That is correct. So anyway, we got a pop up and made it home, and it was totally uneventful. And in fact, my wife went to sleep. Nothing to see at that point, so she went to sleep, and we had a nice uneventful trip home, and great barbecue and a story to tell. So
Well, and you know
uh,
what you're really talking about here is decision making. And
yeah,
that is such a big deal. You're in VFR, you see that IMC is in front of you. We have a decision to make, and it's not at some point, it's now. We have to come up with an idea. And I'll give
exactly.
you a good example of, unfortunately, some bad decision making. And fortunately, well, I can't say it worked out, but there were no fatalities. I own interest in a flight school down in Naples, Florida. And on New Year's Eve, well, actually, it was New Year's Day. It was 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
A fella decided to take three passengers in his Bonanza, and they were going to fly out of there off to someplace. Now, first of all, it's 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Second, the weather report for the time was zero visibility, 100-foot vertical visibility. So you're in fog. This is not great. This guy goes ahead and takes off. And by the way, no IFR flight plan. And
Oh,
he's he should be talking to Miami in that case. He tried calling Fort Myers, which is closed at that hour. So he's talked to nobody. He's done no prep to speak of as far as we can tell. And he takes off. The challenge is, Pat, we tend to think everything's going to work out great. By the time he got to 100 feet, which means he's punching into the ceiling here, he has an engine problem, which you've brought up before. Now we have a major distraction on an instrument flight that I just punched into bad visibility. So he gets a bit lost, I would say,
yeah.
crashes into our hangar, skids across the street, and comes to rest next to the jet hangar. Fortunately, the airplane got turned around backwards, so everybody was thrown back in their seats. They all survived. They walked away. The airplane's a total disaster. The engine is off, the propeller is off, one wing is destroyed. Taking off in 00 is legal under Part 191.
Right.
But it is, as I am fond of saying, galactically stupid. Because
Yeah.
if anything goes wrong, you can't come back. You're way below the minimums for the approach. In a case like this, where you have an engine malfunction and you're not getting full power, you're screwed. There are no options. I can't see where to go. I can't see what I'm over or what I'm about to hit. That's a case where really decision making does come into play, and people don't respect, personal opinion, how hard it is to fly an airplane when you've been deprived of any visual aids, when all you've got's the panel and you're not really up to speed with that. And I mean really current. Stress level goes way up, the ability to think goes way down, and you're almost guaranteed something bad is going to happen. Maybe bad enough that you don't fly instrument for 5 years.
Well, and when you add on the stress of an engine issue or something like that, the distraction of
Mm.
an, that takes us into that arrogance, ignorance, complacency, and distraction. The four horsemen, if you will, of of bad things happening. When you talk about this guy that took off in low ceilings, you remember we did a video on this early on in MadPropsAero's history
Mhm.
of the young fellow that took off out of West Houston Airport in 900-foot ceilings. And 30 seconds later, he and his passenger, who he shouldn't have been carrying because he was a student pilot, were dead in a ditch across the street. Um, and found sometime mid afternoon, mid morning, something like that. The next day, I was in the terminal when the family was notified that the pilot was dead. It's something you don't want to witness.
Well,
So
and the thing that breaks my heart about these, Pat, is it's not a failure of the equipment. It's a
yeah,
decision-making thing. You have decided to do something that you know you really shouldn't be doing. You
right,
don't have the training, you don't have the experience, you've never done this with a CFI, and I really don't think most people realize how challenging it is. Even if you're flying along, life is good and there's an undercast and it's thin enough that you can see some lights and buildings underneath. Setting down into that is going to get way more exciting than you think because first of all, when you enter a cloud, initially the first few times it feels like an impact. I mean, it's just water vapor, but boom, it's right in your face.
yeah,
That can be really jarring. And I don't think people are often encouraged by CFIs and more experienced pilots saying, don't
yeah.
prove how cool you are. Don't prove how awesome you are. Go get some training because this is much harder than you think it is.
Yeah, early in my instrument flying career, this is kind of after I'd scared myself and kind of had worked my way through that frightening situation. I was going to Dallas for a meeting, and a friend of mine invited him to just ride with me if he wanted to. A pilot buddy of mine, and it was clear and visibility unlimited going up. Gorgeous day, forecast to be that way for the trip home, and we knew we would be coming back after dark. And we got about three-quarters of the way home or so, and I start noticing these little patchy clouds below us. And okay, well, that's not a problem. We're still VFR. The closer we got to home, the thicker those, or the smaller the breaks were between those clouds. And I'm listening to the METARs at various airports, and the temperature and dew points getting closer and closer and closer together. And by the time we got back to West Houston, the temperature and dew point was within a degree or two, and I ended up having to fly an NDB approach back into West Houston Airport. That's how long ago it was.
I
But
remember those.
this is the case. This is a case where the forecast, as much as you were talking about your experience, the forecast was for clear and visibility unlimited for hours and hours and hours and hours, and it ended up not being so, necessitating an approach. A similar situation happened a few years ago in the kind of the Christmas era, kind of Christmas era time frame. Um, my wife and I were flying to a Mexican restaurant that we like to go to, and we inadvertently flew into IMC. This was another night where there was not a cloud in the sky, stars everywhere. The forecast, I checked the forecast, talked to a flight service. Forecast was for clear visibility unlimited all night long. So we launched VFR, and we flew into a cloud, absolutely unseen cloud. And I got to tell you, uh, even at that point, I was a fairly experienced instrument pilot. Even with an experienced instrument pilot, when that happens and you're not expecting it, it's disorienting. And to make matters worse, in our case, there were some 2,000-foot towers in the vicinity of where we were. Now, I knew where they were. I know where they are. But that for just that second, Jamie, when we hit those clouds, it was like, where are those? Where are those towers, and which way do I need to turn to avoid them? It was a nanosecond, but it felt like a lifetime. And of course, where are all my charts and plates and everything? Back in the baggage compartment because it was
Where they're
for
most helpful. Yeah.
clear and visibility unlimited. So, I don't care what your experience level is. If you're surprised when something like that happens, you're going to react the way I did. I promise you.
Well, and that's why this is such a good topic because it's not hyperbole. We've both been in that situation early enough along in our careers and we've encountered it since. Having the training is a big deal. And I will tell you, in my case, I went to a great flight school in Central Florida, but we were not allowed to file and fly IFR once we got our instrument ticket. It's an insurance thing. It's okay. Well, I go up to Gainesville, Florida to do my initial CFI ride, which is the double I, the instrument instructor. So, and great guy, Dewey Oliver, who flew for the University of Florida. He was just a really great guy, but very thorough, Pat. Much like yourself, this
Mhm.
was not a half an hour oral. This was a long thing, followed by a flight, which had some interesting stuff. I ended up in a hold on a VOR on a certain radial at an altitude and heard somebody else call in the same VOR radial and altitude. And I asked Dewey, "Do you have them in sight?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Then I'm breaking out of this hold." Okay. It is a beautiful day. I'm wearing a view limiting device. Finish the ride, get the paperwork done. I'm going home fresh as a daisy after my double I
Yeah, of
ride.
course.
And it's a beautiful day, but Sanford, my home airport, is right in the center between two lakes, Monroe and Jessup. It used to be a Navy base years ago. So the weather there sometimes changes where it
Mhm.
doesn't to the surrounding area. By the time I got there, it was hard IFR with a 300-foot ceiling. Fortunately, this is my home airport. So I've shot the ILS-9 a million times. I know the voices of the people in the tower, but punching into those clouds, I distinctly remember that. And as I passed through 500 feet, and I've got the needles right there in the donut, everything's going great. But in the back of my head, it's like, this better be accurate. So we're getting pretty low. And sure enough, I broke out at 250 decision height. And boom, there's the runway in front of me. Land, go tie it down. And the great thing that I love about this, there's an instructor with a student in the next tie down spot. And the instructor comes over to me and real sly goes, "Is that your first approach by yourself?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it was." He goes, "Me too." You learn by doing, but do it
Yeah,
with somebody.
with somebody, yeah. That's exactly right.
Well,
Yeah, it's nothing to trifle with, Jamie, and I hope that, that what we've talked about here for these last, 15 or 16 minutes will give some folks a pause to think a little bit before they punch into something they're either not qualified for or haven't done for a while, or those that haven't gotten their instrument ratings yet. Maybe it'll be enough to kind of push them over the edge to get that instrument training. I'll tell you, even if you never use your instrument rating, you will still be a better pilot for having it. And one of the things that I do tell my applicants once they pass their instrument check rides is every single flight for the next 6 months, file for
mm,
real. Pick up your clearance. Whether you're under the hood or not is not important. Whether you're by yourself or with a family member or with a friend, not important. File. You need the practice in writing down clearances, in calling ATC, in complying with their instructions. Ask for an approach at your destination. File coming home. Ask for an approach at your home destination. If you can put on the hood with a safety pilot, all the better. But for every single flight for 6 months after you get your instrument rating, no matter how long or short it is, file. It will do wonders for your confidence. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
no, no, it's really good advice. And for those who don't accept the sage advice of Mr. Brown, let me give you another perspective on this. If you choose not to get the training, not to get the experience, not to have the instrument capabilities that allow you to do this safely, and you're flying along over a layer and I'm going to settle down and go to my home airport, this will probably work out. That's a hard no. If the word probably finds its way into your thought process, that's no. Do what Pat said before. Turn around and go back where you came from. Go someplace else and do not scud run. And
Yeah,
that's all I got, Pat. That's it.
that's all I got.
Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate you talking about this topic because I really do think it's important. This is one of those things that unfortunately kills people, and it's just a decision. It's not the airplane that failed. So, y'all click like, subscribe to the channel, and say a kind word about Pat Brown when you can because he's kind of sharp.
Adios, my friend.